Okay, what we're going to do first is at the top of the paper, like we're going to do another drawing down in this larger area. In the top paper, I've just marked out a really thin bar, and what we're going to do is what's called a value scale, where you go from the white of the paper and very evenly. It's not going to be a value scale like where you see individual squares that progressively get darker. This should be a single tone that progressively keeps getting darker and darker and darker. It keeps transitioning from a very light value to something that's very dark. So you want to start with like your 4H, and it's going to be the same. My pencils are getting a little soft or short here. Now I've got to stand up to do this. You want to get, again, where you're comfortable and your arms are not like resting on the board. What you'll have a tendency to do on this, just because you've marked out this bar, is go back and forth, right? Like that. I want you to get used to making a tone that's kind of omnidirectional. In other words, the marks are just kind of overlapping and going all sorts of different directions. Because you could go back and forth and get it pretty even on something this small. But say you were doing a sphere that you wanted to have a nice even tone on that was this big. You need to be able to do something where you don't see things like lapping, where you don't have, if you're doing little back and forth marks and then I do another row of back and forth marks, where they overlap will have a tendency to get darker. So think of it more as kind of a gray cloud that kind of spreads out. So I'm starting with the harder pencil, and I don't know if this will even, I'm going to go something a little softer. You should go just, again, if you see it, that is dark enough. The lighter tones are definitely the harder ones to do, because hard pencils make lines that are very mechanical, almost like a ballpoint pen. Just like home. Yeah, so it'll go a little softer. But I'm not going to push on the pencil at all. I'm still keeping the marks kind of close together. I'm not really worried about going over the lines or anything like that. I'm kind of going back and forth. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing this. But I'm letting my hand slide on the paper, like I'm holding the pencil and letting it rest on the paper, my hand's sliding, but I'm not pushing on the pencil. You'll find that your pencils will make mark, just, you don't have to push them into the paper, especially when you get with the softer pencils. So I'm going to switch from, that was a B, from that into, this is a 4B. So in this one, I'm actually even supporting it a little bit so it doesn't get too dark. But I'm going to, in order to get this to have a very gradual transition, what I'm going to do is kind of feather it back over the other pencil. I got a little dark spot there. So it's not like I'm doing one pencil for a square and then I suddenly stop that one and use the next softer pencil. There's going to be a lot of overlap. You kind of feather them across each other and it gives you a nice gradual shift. One of the things you can do, and again, don't worry about keeping within the lines, you can clean that up later if it bothers you. But say I'm going along, right, and I get much darker, like I get this huge jump. Like this is a gray that would be more about here, right? And then much darker down at the end. One of the things that makes the kneaded eraser so versatile is I can take it, let's see if I could stretch it over my fingertip, right? So I get this nice smooth surface, and then I just kind of tap it. And it picks up the tone without smearing. So a lot of times you'll still have to go back and maybe go even that out a little bit. You know, it's not going to make it perfectly smooth, but it's a good way to lighten an area without like wiping it away completely. Your marks stay there, you just take pigment off of them. The other thing, if you find like these are easy to kind of become therapeutic, where people will like constantly work it, you know, as they're sitting there. If you're gonna do that with it, you want to like rip yours in half and have one for your little, you know, like worry beads, and then the other one used to erase. Because if you keep handling them too much, they get really soft and kind of sticky, and they don't work quite as well. So that's the first thing we're going to do, value scale. Just, it doesn't have to be real wide, just narrow, but the goal is to have, so the marks are not obvious, and you're not going to smear it. Like no using your finger to kind of rub the graphite out. With this, I actually want you to render the tone using the point of the pencil. You don't really want to, like it's, some people will take the side of the pencil and kind of do this with it, right? Because it's a good way to kind of get tone very quickly. But if you can, I don't know if you can see that up there or not, but that tone that I did that way by holding the whole length of that graphite down on the paper and kind of is much rougher. This is much rougher and more broken than these areas. And the reason for that is that I've basically done a rubbing. So what's happening when I have that whole length of graphite rubbing on the paper is that I'm skipping and just hitting the high points, right? So the texture in the paper becomes really pronounced. And if I'm rendering a shadow that I want on an object that I want to be really smooth, right? So like what we're going to be drawing on the eggs, you don't want ragged marks. You don't want a lot of texture. So just trying to get, again, use your whole arm. Try not to go edge to edge on it. Imagine, you know, that you had to make some of this a little bigger. And keep it kind of at the top of the paper. It's also, I have found it better to draw on a hard surface. So it's usually a good idea to just go ahead and take your paper out of the pad and put it down on the drawing board. I actually, at home, when I draw on a piece of plexiglass. That's really, you know, that's kind of, I did draw on regular like plate glass that I glued down to a drawing board until I broke it one time too many, and so now plexiglass. Because it's all about pressure, right? Like the pressure putting down. And if you've got that spongy pad underneath it, it's a little harder to control that.